morning, Dan and Amy. So on Friday, there was another Hillary Clinton document dump, 189 pages of FBI's interviews of Clinton Inc. associates, Cheryl Mills, her former chief of staff, and the like. And a lot of additional questions raised as a result of these documents that were produced by the FBI, like, and in the Department of Justice, because that's who provides immunity. And one of the big questions is, why so liberal with immunity deals for subjects of an investigation, Department of Justice? Very strange. There were a couple of Clinton flacks who were asked about this over the weekend. One is her campaign manager, Robbie Mook. Mook.
Wait, what's his name, Dan?
This Dickensian toddler that's running Hillary's campaign. Listen to this goof with Jake Tapper. Tapper asked him specifically about a mention in these interviews. Platte River Networks, that IT consultant that she used, they had her servers in their closet.
Mm-hmm. But they were protected. Don't worry.
They referred to the Hillary cover-up operation, quote unquote, which they said was a joke. But if everything's such a joke, then what's this in reference to? Why the immunity deals? And of course, what does Clinton camp do? They rely on the clean bill of health they continue to impose on Jim Comey as Jim Comey's assessment of Hillary Clinton and her team's actions. Listen to Mook.
It was a document dump on Friday. We learned from the FBI that an IT contractor managing Hillary Clinton's private email server made reference to the, quote, Hillary cover-up operation in a work ticket. He used those words after a senior Clinton aide asked him to automatically delete emails after 60 days. This IT worker certainly sounded like he thought he was covering something up, no?
Look, Jake, first of all, I'm actually glad you asked this question because a lot of this stuff is swirling around there in the ether. It's important to pull back and look at the facts here. The FBI did a comprehensive and deep investigation into this, and at the conclusion of that, FBI Director Comey came out and said to the world that there was no case here, that they did not have evidence of wrongdoing on Hillary's part.
So what's the Hillary cover-up operation that the IT worker was referring to?
Well, but this is the perfect example of what's going on here. The Republicans in the House side are selectively leaking documents for the purpose of making Hillary look bad. We have asked the FBI to release all information that they've shared with the Republicans so we can get the full picture. But again, I would trust the career professionals at the FBI and the Justice Department who looked into this matter, concluded there was no case, than I would Republicans who are selectively leaking information.
Hillary does not need any help to make herself look bad. So that was Mook.
Well, it makes him look bad when he blames Republicans.
Oh, this
is so silly.
It's absurd. And then you had the more senior advisor, because he's got a beard, so he's distinguished and an intellectual. Joel Benson was on with Chris Wallace, asked the same question. What's with all these immunity deals? Standard issue, nothing to see here. Matter of course in these investigations.
Well, Chris, I think you're probably familiar with what limited immunity is, and it's fairly routine when police and law enforcement are investigating a particular issue, and you're sitting down with them to give full cooperation, turn over materials, hand over computers, BlackBerries, whatever. They narrow their scope of their investigation to the issue at hand. And so what limited immunity is, anything else, is irrelevant to them at that. They're looking at the specific investigation, and that's what limited immunity means. Chris, I believe you know that. Sure, so it's fairly appropriate and routine.
Mm-hmm. It's all appropriate and routine. For another perspective on this, we're happy to be joined again by our friend Andy McCarthy, who writes over National Review, nationalreview.com, and also former federal prosecutor who prosecuted the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. So he knows something about federal prosecutions and federal investigations that lead to prosecutions. And he's written a couple of compelling pieces over the weekend on this topic. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, good morning.
So, Joel Benson, this is routine. There's nothing to see here. This is much ado about very little sound and fury from the Republicans. Is that right?
Well, no, there's nothing routine about giving somebody immunity in exchange for something you could obtain by handing them a subpoena. What happened in this case, and it's interesting for him to see that the last fellow that you've had on the tape where he says that, this is routine. The prosecutors, the Justice Department narrows the case down, and then extraneous things they can grant immunity on because it's not really the focus of the investigation. What they gave Cheryl Mills immunity on, Cheryl Mills being Mrs. Clinton's then deputy chief of staff at the State Department, what they gave her immunity on was her computer. And it was on that computer that they decided which of the 62,000 emails on Clinton's server were going to be turned over to the government and which she was going to retain, that is to say, which she was going to try to destroy. And she actually did destroy many thousand of them. So, number one, they gave her immunity on something that went to the heart of the investigation. And secondly, it is true that you do give limited immunity routinely in an investigation for things like in exchange for submitting to an interview with the FBI, they may make a limited immunity agreement that's known as a proper agreement, whereby they agree that we won't use any of the statements you make in the interview against you, but everything else is fair game, and we can even use the statements you give us to get investigative leads, and if we find anything, we can use those against you too. So it's a very limited form of immunity. But that's not what happened here. They didn't give her immunity in exchange for sitting down for an interview. They gave her immunity from prosecution on anything they might find in the computer. It would be the same as if you found a guy coming out of a bank, right? And he's running down the street, he's got a big sack on his back, it would be the equivalent of you say to him, well, let me see what's in your bag, and I'll give you immunity for what's ever in it.
Wow.
So basically, you're forfeiting the right to prosecute the bank robbery if he'll show you what's in the bag.
So Cheryl Mills wouldn't have turned over her laptop unless she was granted immunity?
She wouldn't have had a choice. You don't have there's no Fifth Amendment privilege to physical evidence. So you have a Fifth Amendment privilege not to be forced to be a witness giving oral testimony against yourself, but any physical attribute of your person and any physical item that you possess, the grand jury has a right to. So all the government has to do to get you to turn that over is simply hand you a subpoena. And if you don't comply with the subpoena, they can prosecute you for contempt of court. If they're afraid that you're going to destroy the thing, whatever the item is, rather than comply with the subpoena, they can go to a judge and get a search warrant to have the agents take it from you forcibly. But you don't have to horse trade to get something that the law gives you a right to get without having to make any concessions. So prosecutors never give immunity in exchange for the surrendering of a piece of evidence that they could simply get by subpoena.
And Rudy Giuliani was on. He basically said it seems like the purpose of this investigation was to hand out immunity deals. It's not just Cheryl Mills, her former chief of staff. It's also her longtime aide, Heather Samuelson, given the same immunity deal. You write in one of your pieces that both Mills and Samuelson, who are lawyers, also permitted to represent Hillary Clinton in the very same investigation, which they were personally granted immunity from prosecution. I mean, the layers of this are rather remarkable. And isn't it normally the case when you're working through the prospect of a criminal enterprise that you use subordinates to get to the principal? So in other words, you use your prosecutorial leverage to maybe grant immunity if they're going to testify against the principal, who's the ultimate target, but you don't just run around insulating all the subordinates from the ultimate target of your investigation so that they have no incentive to cooperate and that you create hurdles to the principal.
Yeah, that's of course true. But let me just try to cut to the chase because I have a column that's up this morning about this. I don't think this investigation ever had a chance of yielding charges. And the real reason for that is that President Obama engaged in the same behavior that Mrs. Clinton did, which is another thing that was confirmed in the document dump this weekend. He actually had a pseudonym,
right,
which is very interesting, an alias that he used to exchange emails with her. And emails between the president and the secretary of state, especially if they're about any kind of policy matters, are going to be presumptively classified. I argued 8 months ago that there's no way that the Justice Department could charge Mrs. Clinton without exhibiting in a very embarrassing way that Obama himself had engaged in the same behavior in violation of the law, in violation of his own executive order laying out the categories of classified information. So I think this whole thing was made to look like a thorough investigation that would exonerate Mrs. Clinton in the end, with everybody in the equation knowing that there was no way charges were ever going to be brought. And I think that's been confirmed by what we've seen.
Well, and the other embarrassing thing would have been that everybody would know then that President Obama's pseudonym was Carlos Danger.
No,
And that would have been embarrassing.
What was his
for him as
pseudonym?
well.
What was his?
We don't know what his pseudonym
so we
was.
just,
we just know he had one from
Yeah,
this
but the
document dump.
interesting thing is that you're quite right. It comes out in a conversation with Huma Abedin, who I guess knows an alias if she's heard one.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
she
Yes,
does.
yes.
Hey-o.
That's true. Yeah, she was very interested in that pseudonym. I think she wanted to cross-check it. Yes.
Well, I'm glad you guys just didn't ask me to spell pseudonym. So
Yes. Nor myself.
Well, so it was never. I mean, this is very interesting. That the whole thing, this was just a big show investigation, is what you're saying, because ultimately they had to insulate not just Hillary Clinton. So you're essentially suggesting that Jim Comey, who I know you know and have great admiration and respect for, you're essentially saying he was in the tank for the President of the United States, if not for the former Secretary of State.
As far as personalities are concerned, I'm not going to go any further than to say the Justice Department was in the tank. How much he was in the know about that, I don't venture a guess on. But if the Attorney General decides there's not going to be any case, or more importantly, if the President decides there's not going to be any case, then there's not going to be a case.
So he couldn't bring charges. Yeah.
Let me run this theory by you. We had former Assistant FBI Director Bill Gavin on the show, and who also knows Comey and has great respect for him. He suggested.
I know him well.
Okay. He suggested that maybe what Comey was doing here, he didn't say this is what he knows. He just said, here's a theory. Maybe what Comey was doing, knowing that it was going to be buried at DOJ if he referred charges, is actually was his way to get all of this information into the public domain for consideration by the electorate in advance of the November election, because otherwise it would have been buried as part of an ongoing investigation/prosecution if he had referred charges, and we would never have seen these documents that we're discussing today, among others, if he had referred for charges.
Well, I do think that Bill is quite correct that in almost every investigation where charges are not brought, you would never, ever have seen the underlying evidence, and you would have had no right to see the underlying evidence. Usually, these are conversations that go on between agents and prosecutors behind closed doors. The government doesn't have any obligation to tell you why they decide not to bring charges, and it's highly unusual that we actually learn that information. I think Director Comey's rationale for that, at least his public rationale for that, has been that when the FBI devotes major resources and time to an investigation, and it's a matter of such public attention, that the public has a right to know. And I think he probably understood that if he hadn't put the information out, Congress was going to hold hearings and the information was going to come out no matter what. So I think he put his best stamp on it. But and we were going to find out about this anyway because of Congress. But I think Bill is right that Comey did try to make sure that there was a public accounting. The flaw in the argument is that we're starting now to learn a lot of things that are floating out in these document dumps and in the other Freedom of Information Act lawsuits that suggest that it was a very selectively mined body of evidence that the Bureau put out. There's a lot of stuff that's in there that we weren't told that we probably should have been told. But we're going to find out.
All right.
And hopefully there'll be a document dump in the middle of the week next time.
Yeah, well.
Not on a Friday.
Only Fridays. Isn't there a long weekend coming up that would be... That'll be the one to look at.
Columbus Day. Yeah.
He is Andy McCarthy, Nash Review Online, really a tremendous resource for understanding all of the legal issues associated with this investigation, generally speaking, but specific to the Hillary investigation, really distills it very nicely for the layman to understand. Andy, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.